I'm Daniel Lowther, Head of Fintech at CCgroup, a B2B technology PR agency. In my 15 years of Fintech PR, I've worked for brands including Visa, Revolut, WorldPay, Deloitte, Flywire, Clearbank, and Travelex. So lots of different parts of the ecosystem. And I've come to the conclusion that most of B2B Fintech brands are marketing blind. And qualitative insight into buying audiences to truly inform sales and marketing strategies that are effective and that don't rely on anecdotes and hearsay. I will be sharing some research that's hot off the press that explains how to influence fintech buyers at major banks and large fintechs. So let's get into it. The fintech market is fast growing and fiercely competitive. Ticket prices, as we'll find out shortly, are averaging at around £100,000, with around 20% at between the 1 and 5 million mark. It's a very lucrative space. Fintech brands, I think, should be reasonably expected to be able to answer these questions. How often do your buyers buy? What is the length of the sales cycle? How many departments influence the buying decision? Where are they looking to invest technology? What problems are they trying to solve? When do they engage with the partner? Where do they hear about those partners? What kind of content engages them most? And within that content, what messages resonate? To win, I think you need to be able to answer these questions. You need to be able to get on the inside track. To get on the inside track, you need real insight. Insight is essential to understanding how best to influence fintech buyers. But I believe that marketers are marketing blind. They don't know enough about their audiences and what influences them. The black books and deals done on the back of a napkin in a pub are over. With the rise of the internet, wonderful things like Google Analytics, HubSpot, we can know much more about our buyers and how they interact with us to optimize what we do. But there is a frightening lack of evidence-led strategies that are put in place. A few personas, as you often see within internal marketing departments in an effort to drive insight. A few personas, Jeremy from IT, he loves Computer Weekly, bigger fan of Twitter, not so big onto LinkedIn, really don't go into the detail and depth that is going to equip a grown-up business to cash in on a very, very lucrative fintech space. What's missing is that quantitative data on how decision makers select technology partners, the detail. So to plug that gap, that knowledge gap, CCgroup asked buyers at major banks and fintechs about what influences their choice of technology partner. Critically, we asked senior decision makers at large UK and US banks, minimum of 1,000 employees for the banks, a minimum of 300 employees for the fintechs, and the average number of employees at firms we spoke to was 5,000. So we like to think that this is the best and most authoritative study in this area. We don't know anybody other than ourselves who released a study a couple of years ago to be looking at this area. And ultimately, what we're trying to do here is help fintech brands market and sell more effectively, basically get better bang for buck. Not everybody has millions of pounds in marketing budget, and it's important that it can be used as sensibly and as effectively as possible. And that's about being able to prioritize and knowing what works and what doesn't work. And just to remark that obviously there's certain insights that we've held back exclusively for client use. So this isn't everything in this deck, but it gives you a good flavor for what's going on out there in the buying market in fintech. So let's get into the detail. So the first stage that I wanted to run through with everybody is before we get into the key influences, just really taking a step back and looking at the buying landscape. We ask people about how often they buy financial technology, at what price point. And the average ticket price point is about 100K, but 20% of respondents have spent between 1 million and 5 million in a single transaction in the last year. And if we look down to timescales, this is a fall from our previous piece of research. So majority take between 6 to 12 months, when before it was about 9 to 12, which sounds like the timescales have probably reduced by 3 months, and actually a significant minority now. So it's nearly a third are taking between 3 and 6 months. And if we look at those two things together, the value of deals is increasing, and the volume, the frequency of them are increasing too. So it's a good time to be in the fintech market at the moment. Really interesting, probably one of the most interesting takeaways is, when does a buyer engage with the technology partner? I, like many of you, would have assumed earlier. But here we see that a third of buyers are only getting in touch with the technology partner at the point of shortlist or purchase. So all of that thinking, that analysis, that discussion, that interrogation may have happened without, if you're a fintech selling into these institutions, without you being involved with it at all. All this is happening based on information that buyers are getting secondary or tertiary. So you better make sure that your shop window looks really good, because you might have very important buyers who are only going to purchase that way and may not get in contact with you until they get to the till. And then in terms of stakeholders, good news really for technology vendors in the space, and that is stakeholder groups have fallen. There were about 10 before, there's now sort of 6 to 8, and the most influential are IT, procurement and strategy. And again, it's important to market to those different roles. So, how do you help the IT team? Don't create a problem for the CIO. What evidence and terms can you present, to procurement? I think some business models, especially given the recession and COVID, need to change. And strategy, how do you fit into the bigger picture? And these are important questions that you need to answer for those different stakeholder groups. So after looking at the landscape, it's important to understand the motivations and the detractors for buyers at this particular juncture. So what's the what and the why and the why not? What areas are being invested in? The top 3 are payments, core banking, and regtech, which is kind of unsurprising. Payments has seen a lot of investment. I think the most investment since fintech began, technically. Real-time payments, open banking, cashless society, super wallets, you're all feeding into that. Core banking, again, unsurprising given the digital transformation programs taking place amongst large banks and smaller ones. And that has probably also been driven by the fact that there are more core banking providers now, and increased competition in the market, which was known to be actually a little uncompetitive and needed some fresh blood. And regtech, again, is another unsurprising result, given the focus on regulation so far this year as part of a maturing sector, and the need to make sure that you comply with the right kind of rules. 6 AMLD wasn't that long ago, for example. So those are unsurprising, I think, areas for technology to be invested in. More surprising, I think, is that blockchain and crypto is in the bottom 3. Blockchain continues to look for a problem that it can solve, I feel. And mortgages and SureTech are higher value, more complex offerings, which may take longer for fintechs to set their sights upon. Often they're dealt with by specialist firms and brought into platforms in a different way. But I think those things will become more prevalent as time moves on. So those are the areas that people are investing in. Why are they doing that? And the primary reasons are demands from clients and technology advances. There are more demands from both consumers and businesses, and there is technology advancements that's helping businesses to deliver on those requirements. But the need to reduce costs is a reoccurring theme throughout this entire study and my masterclass. And given the environment we're in the moment, with the recession and COVID-19, there is a desperate need for firms to reduce costs, especially banks who are struggling to deliver a particularly strong return on equity. And if we look down at the bottom 3, they reflect really that COVID-19 and recession backdrop that we have at the moment. Businesses aren't necessarily looking to increase, they're looking to save. They're not looking to necessarily expand, they're looking to consolidate, and they might be less likely to churn from an existing provider, because if there's a market of uncertainty out there, do you want to create more uncertainty by changing provider? So really, we're in a backdrop there around protection and saving rather than growth and expansion. And then why are firms stopping from investing? That's quite interesting in that cost again comes up. If you can help to deliver a new model or proposition that makes it easier for you to buy from, then absolutely brilliant. And I know there are a lot of fintechs out there revisiting their propositions and the models that sit behind them. Getting consensus across the business is still difficult for those different departments, and obviously ease of integration. Banks have been burnt with trying to do massive migrations. Anything which involves simple integrations, nothing that's bespoke or en masse, is going to be music to these larger institutions' ears. And reflects the wider and growing IT estate that these firms have and their desire not to risk any downtime and the consequences that has. And then looking at the bottom 3, overall, I think that the procurement process is getting better. Banks are becoming easier to work with. There's more automation. There are more APIs and documentation that goes with that, for example. And I think banks have become more comfortable with fintech partners or large fintechs as well. So there's less of a need to focus on ensuring compliance and due diligence on the supplier. I think there's more comfort nowadays, and there are more formal mechanisms put in place to work with third parties. So if that's the what, the why, and the why not, with cost playing a very, very large part, let's get into what influences fintech buyers. So the first area of focus is what channels most influence selection. And as you can see here, where people are influenced is primarily by their peers. So it's still not uncommon for CTO at Bank A to call CTO at Bank B and ask, who do you use and what do you think of them? And now there's no necessarily quick fix for that, but that can be influence. There are ways to build relationships with the right entities. Social media plays a big part in this to ensure that you are able to insert yourself in that conversation and you become a point of recommendation for these peers. What's really interesting is the second and third most influential channels, and that is industry analysts and trade media. Industry analysts are incredibly underappreciated in terms of their influence. We know of analysts that not only build the reports that everybody knows around, the quadrants, the analysis and the segmentation of the market, which is obviously very important, but they go right the way down to drawing up RFPs and lists of providers and even doing due diligence on those providers on behalf of buyers. So having a relationship with the right analysts is really important, especially the higher up the food chain you go and the bigger the ticket the IT investment is. Trade media also ranks very highly, purely based on the fact that it provides depth. If you're looking at trade media versus, say, business tech media, which is 5%, or business national media, even less than 2.5%, respondents are influenced by trade media because it provides depth of information to make a selection. You may have heard of a firm through the other media sets, but you probably wouldn't understand very much about them, not enough to make any kind of informed choice as to whether you want to involve them in a procurement process. So trade media and the depth that it provides makes it a very, very influential channel. Consultants are also very, very high here, as are industry events. Now, I've worked in different areas in terms of different markets from a PR point of view, and fintech is by far and away the most influencer-led. There are a certain pool of people who are well regarded and whose influence carries far and wide. It's really important that firms get to know those influencers and build relationships. It has a big effect on throughput. And then finally, events. One of my clients in 2019 secured 80% of their revenues just from events. You know, revenues have always played a very, very big part in the fintech space. In the last year with COVID, obviously that has changed and everything is now gone digital. But while there has been upheaval that will last for a bit longer, events will be back next year. And it's clear from this research that events still hold a very, very important place in terms of a channel of influencing buying decision makers. If we look at towards the bottom, you know, direct marketing, below and above the line advertising may all be very well and good in terms of driving awareness, but don't really provide the detail and the insight to make any informed selection. So if that's the channel of influence, why don't we look at the content of influence? And unsurprising, but at the top we see white papers. Firms who are looking to work with technology partners really want to understand the detail of what they think, what they offer, what they do. And white papers, ideally third-party sponsored white papers, are a really, really great way of helping buyers to understand what you can deliver for them. Second on that list is analyst reports. Again, very, very highly prized, independent, rigorous in their methodology. They offer unrivaled insight to make sense and structure the market. And we all understand the importance of being top right in a Gartner Magic Quadrant, for example. So those more in-depth reports are the most influential, but also we're looking here at case studies and evidence of success. I think buyers hear a lot of noise and they want to understand who can not just talk the talk, but who can walk the walk. And that is about show me what you have done with brands that I see as similar to myself. And then finally, going down towards the bottom, we have the social media, email marketing, and infographics as less influential content. And that's not to say they're not important. Social media is very important. But in terms of directly influencing decision making, less so. They're too shallow in terms of the information that they can provide. So then we're looking at attributes. So what are the key messages? What are the things that are resonating with buyers? And that again is the C word. Cost effective again comes out top here. Firms want to hear about how technology providers can help to save them money, how they can improve operational efficiencies. And it's interesting, as you see, third from bottom, it's value for money. It seems there's less of an interest in a more nuanced conversation. There's more of an interest of how can you save me some money? So vendors in this space need to listen with both ears to that. Second on the list is open and collaborative. We're an increasingly open market. Open banking is leading to open finance and embedded finance. We have a wider sort of open data economy. Players are building platforms. APIs are providing access. And increasingly firms want to know that the partners they're working with are open and collaborative, and they will also play nicely with other partners. And I think it's a really interesting finding that this sense and spirit of openness is becoming more and more important to buyers. I think the third point is interesting, especially for a PR person like myself, and that is reputation. And I think that speaks to quite a tumultuous 2020. You know, we all saw and heard the Wirecard news with shock. There have obviously been some issues around fintech's involvement in delivering funds to firms that need it most. And there's some regulatory question marks put on the sector as it grows into adolescence and becomes more systemically important to the wider financial services system. So with that increased scrutiny on a nascent industry where it's where it takes a long time, to build a reputation, but it can be very quickly lost, partners are really keen providers are really keen that partners they work with have the right reputation, no skeletons in their closet. And then going back really to the buying landscape, we can see here that ability to meet the RFP criteria and widespread support is less important in terms of influencing selection. Yes, there needs to be consensus. Yes, there will be some hoops to be jumped through from a procurement process, but the process has now become better to the point where it's not a big influencer on selection in of itself. While these things are interesting to understand, what things most influence selection, I thought it'd be really interesting to ask buyers at banks and big fintechs, what prevents selection? What gets in the way? What things don't they hear about from vendors? You know, how can we be better? And the top one says everything really for me. It's that lack of evidence of success. And I see this a lot in the market and sometimes with brands that we work with. There is a lot of talk, but very little evidence. And if we think back to what we've learned during the course of this masterclass, you know, analysts and consultants and peers are the most sort of valued channels. White papers, reports, case studies are the most valued pieces of content. Buyers are crying out for evidence. Buyers are crying out for views to be backed up and affirmed. They want third parties to provide that credibility and trust. That's what's missing at the moment. And that information needs to be made readily available per the third point on the graph here. And that can't all just be through website. Unfortunately, people don't always go to your website to find out more. It needs to be available through different platforms and channels. There must be a push as well as a pull that a website has, for example. And then when it comes down to other things that are getting in the way of selecting a technology provider, that is lack of news or negative comments in the media. You know, news is really important. If you go onto a provider's website and the last release you see is from over a year ago, what does that make you think? You think the business is not doing well, or maybe it's not doing anything. And it's important that news and there's activity coming from business because it demonstrates momentum. In just the same way, the wrong kind of coverage raises questions. So negative comments in the media are a concern and will impact selection from buyers. Excuse me. Awareness comes up amongst analysts and peers here, sort of points 5 and 6. Awareness amongst those important third parties, those people that are in the know, is really important. You need those that are in the know to know. And finally, social media comments are less important, but in my experience have a nasty way of bubbling up into mainstream media. And then obviously speed is less important these days in terms of responsiveness. So I'm going to draw to conclusion this masterclass and leave you with some key takeaways. And that is, the market is becoming more lucrative. There are bigger ticket prices and more frequent purchases. I think almost if you take away nothing from this masterclass, it's this. Buyers are engaging with sellers later, many even at the shortlist stage. So the shop window is everything. Your website, what is easily found through search, is exactly the presentation that your business has to the world. And it's up to you to shape it. We see the usual suspects in terms of what's driving, where investments are going towards. Payments, core banking, regtech are unsurprising, but obviously important areas of investment. And then firms are focused on saving money. They are risk adverse. They don't want to change suppliers unless they have to. And they want partners to save them money over making them money. So that has to be the focus for the messaging, communication, and thought leadership from brands. Trusted third parties have a disproportionate influence. Peers, analysts, consultants, and media, those people that are seen to be independent and credible, have the most sway in terms of influencing buyers. And finally, the type of content that needs to be communicated is evidence-based. Buyers want partners to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And it's the one thing they say they want that they just don't get. So I hope you found this masterclass insightful and useful. I'm available to go through some more details. If you've got any questions on it, please do get in contact. It's always great to meet other like-minded individuals in the fintech space. So there are my contact details. Once again, thanks for taking the time to listen to this masterclass, and take care. Bye-bye.